Hmm? Oh, hi. Welcome back. Oh, hi. I'm Marc. I used to be a senior artist at Blizzard Entertainment and now I teach art for a living. In this new episode of my weekly series that I've been calling YouTube Art School, I'm going to show you how to paint portraits, realistic or stylized. You're about to get a face full of tips on how to practice if that's been a struggle. But also, I'll go over the whole process of painting a face from scratch with clear steps that you'll be able to try right after this. Man, I should charge money for this. Uh-oh. Quickly, let's get this class started. All right, class is in session. Pay attention. Now, I might not charge money for the class, but it doesn't mean that it's free. Get real. To continue watching, you'll have to make sure that you pay the class fee of either 1 like or 1 sub, or else you'll be cursed. Today's class will be a quick look into the portrait painting process and kind of what goes into it and what you need to get there. I'll start with the basics that you should practice if a portrait is out of your league at this point. Basics that with some practice will definitely help you actually paint portraits soon enough. The basics are important though. If those aren't good, your portraits won't either. Anyways, then we'll look at how to study to get more familiar with the structure of the face and we'll end up with the actual steps to paint a portrait. That's a lot to cover in a short time, so it won't be super in-depth, but you should still get a lot of value out of this if painting portraits is something that you're interested in, regardless of your skill level. Wow. A lot of the process that I'll use today is stuff that I cover in other classes on the channel, so I'll probably refer to a few videos to help make this more complete. Also, check the chapters in the video timeline for convenience. Let's get it. To start, we'll want to make sure that we know our basic head and face proportions, because when portraits look bad, that's usually the reason. So how do we draw a basic head with correct proportions? Here we go. Start with circle. Oh no. Come on. There we go. Use your entire arm to help draw the circle. It's way easier than just using the wrist or the elbow. Anyways, from here we find the center. Divide the diameter in thirds and slide that down, matching the first third of the line to the center of the circle to find the chin. The top here is the hairline. The line here is the eyebrow line. This one is the nose. And then we can split those in halves again to find the area where the eyes will be in. And the mouth. Boom. Easy. Now we have a problem. The head is not a sphere. It's a little more blocky than that, so let's shave off a portion of the skull on the sides here. That's better. And draw the jawline. Let's add the eyes and the eyebrows, the nose very loosely, and the lips. I might as well slap some ears on there too. That's how I build a super generic face. It borrows a few things from the Loomis method, but I find it simpler this way. From here, you can just adjust the features to make more feminine or more masculine faces. For females, I'll tend to make the eyes slightly bigger and more round, shorten the nose, and bring the mouth along with the nose closer to the eyes, essentially making a shorter face with a rounder head. Also, I tend to use a softer curve for the jawline. For males, pretty much the opposite. Smaller/wider eyes, longer nose, longer face, longer heads with a more square-ish jaw. Easy peasy. It's not as easy to draw heads in perspective though, but all the same proportions still apply. Instead of all the straight lines that we drew, you'll instead want to consider those lines as more like slices in the spherical shape of the head. Start with the line splitting the sphere in half horizontally. That's what we use as the eyebrow line. And you can think of this as like the equator on the globe. And then add the symmetry line for the face. This will indicate which way the head is facing, so it's kind of important. From here, we can draw all the same lines that we did before. We just want to be careful with our perspective because if the lines are wonky, so will your face. Well, not your face, but the face you're drawing. Then quickly we can add some facial features, always making sure that we follow our guidelines. I recommend that you practice this stage a lot until it becomes easy and until you remember all the guidelines from memory. It's a great exercise and one that I recommend very often to my students. Now, for a slower, more in-depth version of what I just covered, you can check out a class that I did on the topic in the top right corner of the screen and down in the description. It was taken directly from my art program, for which, by the way, you can get a nice big discount for a few more days until the end of the month. Promo code down in the description. Now that the basics are out of the way, we can study from reference better. For the second step, first we'll want to find great references. Not all references are created equal. Find some that have great lighting. That's the most important. At first, try faces facing the camera. And as you get better, it's good to increase the challenge and try different angles. This one I have here is probably the worst acceptable kind of reference, but you should aim to find better. Now, sure, we're gonna study from reference, but what exactly do you pay attention to at first? Let me recommend a few things to observe when you do this exercise. Of course, the more you learn about anatomy of the face, the more you can observe and the more you can get out of your references. One thing I find that helps when measuring distances for proportions, like we did in the previous chapter, is to ignore the nose until the end. This makes it easier, to me at least, to measure the distance between the eyes and make sure that everything is lined up properly. Wow, that's hot. Anyways, with or without the nose, find the symmetry line first. You can always use that to measure distances on both sides. It's a great point of reference to make sure that nothing is too far or too close to it. Then be sure to spot the direction of the perspective to properly align the eyes, the eyebrows, the nostrils, and the mouth line. This is usually where a lot will go wrong for less experienced artists, so make sure everything lines up. Then you can measure the position of the sides of the nostrils there and see how that lines up with the corner of the eyes and even the corner of the mouth. In yellow, I used a curve from the outside of the eyes to the spot right below the bottom lip. That curve should be similar on both sides of the symmetry line. That's the only reason I drew it. And of course, those are just some that I recommend, but there are plenty of other guidelines that you could use instead. Proportions aren't everything though. On top of all the smaller subtleties in the anatomy that you'll be able to pick up over time as you do more of these kinds of studies, you can also spot where the light will usually land more often. I have it here represented in yellow, but as you can see, we got light on the cheeks, the bottom lip, the chin, the top of the nose, the forehead, the eyebrows, and the upper eyelids, primarily, in this instance at least. This will vary a bit depending on the light source, but if you don't want to bother with a light source yet, just add more light in those areas when painting portraits and it should already look pretty convincing, even when we completely remove the facial features. See? Not bad. Practice this stuff a lot, as in practice observing these things. Observation is a skill. Develop it. Finally, we move on to the steps to actually paint a portrait. Ooh, exciting. These are the same steps that I would recommend applying when doing studies, like we just went over, or when painting portraits from imagination. Process is everything, and the order in which we do things matters. So take mental notes. We start with the basic construction like we saw a moment ago. Mine is pretty sketchy, but use as many guidelines as you need to get a semi-clean line art. Something like this. This is a step that you'll be able to get rid of with some experience, but I did it here just to show the process. I recommend that you do too until this gets easy. I set this layer blending mode to multiply since we'll be adding the flats underneath. The flats? What? Of course, I'm talking about the next layer where we'll have the flat colors and just that. No shading at this point. Just select a mid-tone that's not too saturated and also not too light or not too dark, because we'll be adding shading on top of that, so the overall result will get darker in the end. So far though, easy. Am I right? Now the shading is where it gets a little bit more complicated. That's where we try to give the 2D drawing the illusion of 3D. I have a class dedicated to shading, so check that one out if this is challenging. It should be though, this stuff is not easy. Link in the top right corner of the screen and down below. At this stage, we only want to focus on super basic shading, focusing on the bigger volumes, the bigger details. Remember the light surfaces that I mentioned in the previous chapter? Now we're basically adding shading, darkness, shadow, everywhere else. This pass of shading I do on an individual layer set to multiply on top of the flats and on top of the line art. We're not thinking about the lights here though. Imagine more of an ambient light without any clear direction. And one more detail with the shading. Here I use a lighter version of the skin color to paint with, so my shadows will have a bit of warmth to them. Anyways, once the rough pass is done, pretty simple so far, No details, that's the key. But now it's time to polish our shading pass a little bit more. Here I pop a new layer on top of my stack of layers, and I'm just going to leave it set to normal blend mode. It's here that I'll focus on the smaller, darker areas of the face, the cavities of the mouth, the nostrils, the eyelids, and overall on the rest of the face, helping shape things up a little better. As you can see though, I'm really not focusing on the color at this point. You could even do this in all grayscale if that works better. It's pretty much the same thing. I start this step by adding the smaller shading details as you've seen, and then when that's good, I move on to the highlights on the skin, using a slightly warmer color, focusing on the surface areas of the face that I talked about in the previous chapter. You can see though, as much as possible, I'm using a softer brush and a lot of smudge tool, being careful to avoid visible brush strokes. Not to say that you can't have any, but unless you have enough experience, it usually doesn't look too good. Best to avoid unless you're familiar with this process and have done it many times. Now, once the shading is done, there's not much left. We're almost at the end. Pretty quick, huh? Now let's add a new layer set to hard light, and I'll go over the face with a soft brush, adding just some blush on the cheeks, an overall glow to the skin, colors to the lips, and some more subtle skin tones to make her look more alive. That's about good enough, not too much. If you were painting in grayscale, maybe you'd want to go a little bit more saturated with your colors, a little heavier. But for me, that's enough. Now what's left? Oh, the hair. Let's quickly paint in the hair with a big brush at first, focusing on the structure of the haircut. And then I want to focus on the details, the little that I have, closer to the face, the focal point. A lot of students go a little too crazy with the hair detail and it tends to take away from the face. I think a good rule to have in mind is to always have more definition, more details in the face compared to the hair. That should improve the reads. And also let's slap on some subtle highlights on here too while we're at it. The last step. Maybe more optional, but let's add a simple light source to make this pop some more. Once again, a new layer set to the hard light blend mode will be needed here on top of the layer stack. I'll just get this done quickly, but you can see my full class on lighting in the top right corner of the screen and down below. What's cool with having the light on its own layer is that you can change the color super easily if you need to, or experiment with different light directions without touching the actual portrait painting at all. Very nice. These are the steps. That's it for today's class. I hope that was helpful. Let me know in the comments. Now, to congratulate you for attending the class, you can grab one of my 2 main brush sets for free in the top right corner of the screen and in the description below. If you end up creating some cool portraits after the class, show me on social media. I don't have time to comment on it, but I'll often try to reshare or repost a few at least, to send traffic your way. And I love to see what you create. The painting here was super quick, so it's not the most detailed ever, but still, I think it's really coming alive. I think it also shows that having a good process can make things very straightforward. Now, make sure that you have your notifications on to be on time for next week's class. And don't forget to check out my complete art education program.